Nuala Walsh, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from London. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah in the United States. And today we're going to be talking about Nuala's new book, Tune In: How to Make Smarter Decisions in a Noisy World. I love this title and I love the topic of this book. I think we are all bombarded with constant sensory overload and information overload nonstop. And if we want to be able to function in a healthy way in society, in the workplace, in our homes, we need to figure out how to block out all the noise, to tune into what we are doing, to be present in the moment, be with the people we're with, etc. And that's becoming increasingly harder and harder to do because of the constant bombardment, because of social media, because of all of the news sources, everything that's out there constantly. And so I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to sit down with you today and to discuss this and unpack some of what you have in your book. As we get started, I wanted to share Nuala's bio with everybody. Nuala Walsh is the author of Tune In, as I mentioned, and is a non-executive, a non-executive director, a behavioral scientist, an award-winning marketeer with 3 decades in investment management. Her roles include CMO of Standard Life Aberdeen and senior positions at BlackRock, Merrill Lynch, and PA Consulting Group. Today, as Mind Equity CEO, she advises Fortune 500 leaders globally, among others. Holding multiple first-class master's degrees, she is a visiting speaker at Harvard Kennedy School, INSEAD, and the London School of Economics. And you can find out a lot more about her at her website, nualagwalsh.com. Nuala, anything else you would like to share with the audience by way of your context, personal background, before we dive on into the discussion about your book?
No, I think you've covered quite a lot there. I'm sure some of it will come out as we talk through.
Okay, wonderful. One of the first things I always like to ask authors is, why this book? Why now? You have a long storied career, lots of successes. What was it that you saw? You know, what gap, what issue, what reason was there for you to put the time and effort, sweat equity into getting this book out there today?
Well, it was probably based on my background, as you've just mentioned. I spent nearly 30 years in corporate life. And then I left and went back to school, as it were, and I did a master's in behavioral science. And what I found from that, John, was the ability to put into perspective and to put a very different layer and explanation on the business challenges that I saw. So I was able to explain a lot of the mistakes that have been made. And I thought that with this information, people would be able to prevent more. So it was really a combination. Plus, I loved it. I absolutely loved the topic. So I think we're all interested in human behavior. Some people tend not to accept, maybe, or prioritize the human element in decision making. People tend to get overconfident, etc., in terms of how they make decisions. So I thought that pulling all of this together, if people had more of the insight that I was very lucky to get, I thought that, and I was able to combine that with my pretty vast background, I thought it would tell a very good story, and it would also be incredibly useful for people at whatever stage of the career spectrum they were at.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that's a really great foundation for why this book is important and why it's something people should be paying attention to right now. Like you said, I think it's human nature, right? We tend to be overconfident in our own decision-making capabilities. And no matter what our best intentions are, we can never get enough information. So we're always working with an information deficit when trying to make decisions. Even when we try to make data-informed decisions, even when we're going out and collecting data, even when we're talking to lots of people, there are still gaps in our understanding. There always will be. And it's extra hard because of all the noise, because of all the different sources of inputs. And so people often will lean so heavily on, like their gut instinct, or they'll lean so heavily on, their own personal experience. And I think that's great, generally speaking, as long as we're aware of our own biases, because just going off your gut in and of itself opens up the potential for you to simply allow your implicit biases to surface and then influence in ways that you're not even aware of the decisions that you're making, right? And so it's like this constant tension of not allowing yourself to get overwhelmed by all of the data, all the information, seeking appropriate data to inform what you're doing, while also recognizing you're never going to have enough data to fully understand the full complexity of whatever the issue is you're trying to decide on. And so there's always mental shortcuts. There's always all of that messiness of human decision making. And as long as I think if we can have like some intellectual humility around decision making processes, that's probably the best we can hope for, because we're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. But if we can, be self-reflective and have some humility around, not hubris around like I'm the best decision maker ever, I always make the right choice. That then I think we're going to be at least in decent shape, right?
I think you're right. And I think that's the starting point. But the challenge is that people aren't at that point. So people think that they tune in. People think that they're great listeners. People think that they're great decision makers in the same way people think that they're great dancers or communicators or
Yeah.
more moral than everyone else. It's actually called the above average effect. And most people have that. So it is a real problem, because in that case, it's exactly as you say, and that the higher up the ladder you get, you delude yourself and people around you delude you that you're a great decision maker, because you've got a lot right up to then. You've got more right than wrong, or you wouldn't have climbed. But the point is then, at what point, sometimes you must ask yourself, who pays the price for that success? Is it you? Is it other people? It doesn't mean you haven't left carnage behind. It doesn't mean you haven't made some bad decisions. It doesn't mean that other people haven't paid the price for that success to a point. So the problem is now is that people, exactly as you said earlier on, that people crave more information. There is more information, far too much, but it's not only that. People crave more. There's a great study that shows how, in actual fact, that we automatically crave more, and people are no better off or no more accurate in their decision making with 5 variables than they are with 88. So for some reason, people, gathered 88 different variables, but their accuracy level was no better off. And I think you touched on an interesting point as well about this rush to, we go with our instinct and we make this rush to judgment. And so sometimes that is important and is really necessary, and it works in an emergency situation.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works experientially. I mean, I think automatically of Charles Sullenberger, who, he landed the plane on the Hudson River. Well, that was instinct. That was automatic. That was based on experience. So, he didn't have to think that long. He just had to do it in the moment, in that moment. But most people do have the luxury of thinking, but they choose not to, because they don't have time, or they think that they're great decision makers, or they're in a hurry, or the system wants them to make a fast decision. So in business, as you know, the fast decision maker gets rewarded, not the slow decision maker. Certainly not in any company I've ever worked. And you as a client or a consumer, you pay your therapist, doctor, professional for the service, and you might pay them, but you actually want an answer really quickly. So we are in this world of instant meals, instant money, instant weight loss, instant advice, even for things that take an appropriate amount of time. So that's even just one layer. And then you get into, which voices you tune into and tune out of as well.
Yeah. And also the tension between like analysis paralysis. So on the one hand, making quick decisions, right? Sometimes without enough information. Other times people who want to be thoughtful about it, they want to put in the time, they're willing to do it, but then they just get stuck in this trap of analysis paralysis, and they never get enough to make the decision. And so they never actually move forward. And sometimes no decision is like the worst decision of all. Like just choose something, move forward, learn from what you chose, iterate, and maybe it wasn't the right choice, but you learn from that. Now you can figure out the right step forward. And so it's like, yeah, you don't want it like you don't want people to be flippant, like the studies that talk about when people walk into an interview. It used to be that people would say, in the first 10 seconds of the interview, the interviewer usually has made their decision about the person. Now, like more recent studies are showing, it's literally like the snap of the fingers. The very
That's right.
first impression is what they're making decisions off of, which is ridiculous. Yet that's, people with hubris, that they think that that's reasonable, I guess. And that's ridiculous. On the other hand, though, if you're never actually pulling the trigger, making a decision on something, so you can move things forward, that's harmful. And so find like being intentional, being thoughtful, being deliberate, but also, forcing yourself to actually move forward. That's that constant balancing act, that constant tension that I think every leader has to face, right? And I don't have an easy answer to that. But other than to say, like anyone who's listening or watching, like pay attention to your inclination. Are you the type that's like going to jump at things super fast? Maybe you should slow down a little bit. Are you the one that like takes forever to decide on anything? You probably should surround yourself with people who can help you get out of that pattern so you can make more timely decisions. And maybe that'll help us get a little bit closer to like the right balance of where we should be.
You're right. And your point about how people make their decisions in the first couple of minutes and then, or seconds even, what happens if you're a juror and you do that? And studies have
Yeah.
shown that jurors say that 89% of jurors studied, or surveyed rather, say that they think reflectively and they consider the evidence and they weigh it and they discuss it with their fellow jurors. But then another study shows that in actual fact, only 24% of jurors change their mind. Now that is complete confirmation bias. So it could have been a trial that went on for weeks, but people do not change their mind. And we see it in business. When you're hiring someone, you like them in the first 1 minute and you spend the next 59 minutes justifying why they're a great person to hire. And we've all done it. And we've all seen the consequences of getting that wrong,
And then you
I
get
think.
stuck. Then you get stuck with someone who's bad that's hard to get rid of.
That is absolutely right. But we do it and we know it. I mean, people are smart. It's not that we don't know this. We all know it. But we don't take the time and the environment. This is the thesis of the book, that we are actually tuning out more of the voices that matter, and we are at greater risk of misjudgment because it is such a noisy, busy, frantic world. And AI is not the answer to everything. Judgment really is at a premium. So this whole thing of trying to hear the right voice and tune into the right information, not the most familiar voice or the first voice or the loudest voice, which typically we do, rather than actually pause to reflect on something that doesn't quite feel right. Like journalists are fantastic at doing this.
Yeah.
They really sniff out, what's wrong and it doesn't quite sound right. But, and here's one example. Jack Ma, I don't know if you remember this, from Alibaba, Chinese billionaire, super poster child of China. It was at the Shanghai Bund Summit in 2020. He was just about to make a speech and he got up and his opening sentence, his statements were around, well, I've come here today and I'm not really quite sure if I should say this or not. Now, that says straight away, something's telling you not to say whatever it is you're going to say. Right? These were in his transcript notes. And what did he go on to say? He went on to criticize the Chinese government ad nauseum about their financial system. It's broken, it's archaic, it's this, that, and the other. Now, that might work if you're in America. That does not work if you're in China, even if you are a billionaire. He disappeared from public life for 2 years. And Alibaba, the greatest, one of the largest IPOs, I think it was around 34 billion at the time, was pulled. So listening to your gut, listening to your instinct, rather than the voice of ego or the voice of vanity over sanity, really matters, Jonathan. And the more senior you get and the more important you think you are, the more we are I guess, vulnerable to getting it wrong. And other people pay a price for that, including yourself. But if you hold a position of power, it's other people as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One of the things I know you talk about in the book, you've already talked about the challenge of tuning in, why that's so difficult. You also use the idea around blind spots, deaf spots, dumb spots. Talk to us a little bit more about that, and how does that fit into this tuning in component? How can we do that better?
Yeah, well, the first thing I say is that people tune out because of two things. One, that environment that we've just talked about, and the second thing is our mind. You know, what's going on in our mind. So you've heard, and that's all the biases that you were referring to. So we all know, or we've all heard of, the term blind spots. So
Yeah.
I think, well, like most people are familiar with it, you know, and it is a huge force on our perception and our communication, our decision making. But a lot of people have not heard of deaf spots or dumb spots. And I will say this is the first book that talks about deaf spots to such an extent. And I did it on purpose because I didn't want to write a book about blind spots, because I really wanted to focus on what we hear, what we don't hear, what we mishear, or even what we think we hear and we misunderstand. And we all do that. We all do it all the time. There's more offense taken than given. We think you hear something. You know, you're in negotiations, and what are you listening to? You're in a feedback meeting, and all you hear is a negative thing that's said. You know, so we automatically zone in, or we automatically listen to the voice of our colleagues because we trust our colleagues and they're very good people, or we listen to our bosses. And I think you had someone on the show very recently, you know, and she trusted her bosses completely, only to be fired, and thinking like, how on earth did this happen? Didn't read the signals, didn't listen to what was really being said. I'm sure if that girl went back and listened, what clues were there? There were some clues, but you become an ostrich and you zone them out and you reinterpret to favor your sanity and a more positive situation. And psychologists call that the default to truth. You know, we overtrust people, and that to me is a deaf spot. So is this denying of reality. You know, leaders who are threatened with loss of power deny their reality. Or in a romantic situation and, you know, I love you, you know, and you're desperate to hear it. Well, you're going to believe it, aren't you? Even may or may not be true, may be true. And, you know, all of these medical or these romantic scams and financial scams. So my argument is that we tune out common sense, conscience sometimes, and curiosity, and we replace it with comfort or what's convenient, or even the familiar voices. And then, of course, the third part of my trilogy of error, blind spots, deaf spots, and dumb spots, is when people are unable or unwilling to speak up. So they may self-silence or be a bystander. But when someone doesn't speak up, you can't hear their voice. So by definition, it is a dumb spot, like literally, because you can't actually hear them because they're not saying anything because they're self-silencing. So this whole combination leads us to misjudge and get decisions more right than wrong. And, you know, that is the challenge I think that we face today.
Yeah, well, and I really like like you said, we're all familiar with blind spots. I really like to focus on deaf spots, and I love how you're framing up dumb spots, just because, we just need to pay more attention to that. And we really do just mind-numbingly dumb things sometimes because of our biases, because of our the confirmation bias, because of whatever, is going on that reinforces what we want to be able to do or whatnot. And so, yeah, just taking like a healthy skepticism, not to just be like a total downer. Nobody wants to be around someone who's constantly pessimistic and skeptical and a downer in the group, but like a healthy skepticism around assumptions and like biases, and like why are we doing things the way we're doing them? What really is influencing decision making for me, for this team, for the organization as a whole, and to just have regular like dialogue around that, have feedback loops so that you can, be more likely to uncover when you find yourself in a trap. It's human nature. Like, it's not even a judgment. It's just like we all will be there. And so if I can just acknowledge that, wouldn't I want to create mechanisms, surround myself with people to ensure that I'm not making boneheaded, dumb decisions when I think I'm brilliant? Of course, we would want that, as long as we're not completely insecure narcissists. Like we would want that so that we can be better leaders. We can be better for our people. But it takes time, and it takes a commitment, and it takes some humility. Okay, so there's so much more we could really hone in on and focus on in the book. Perhaps, is there anything specifically you would like to highlight from this work that you think is super important for anyone listening or watching to pay attention to?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is exactly as you say there, and you very kindly pointed out, which is the deaf spots. The other thing I suppose that I think is probably doesn't get noticed so much is that we're very focused on misinformation. And
Mm,
misinformation is, according to the World Economic Forum, the #1 global risk affecting the world in the next few years. So when I say the word misinformation, I know you're automatically thinking disinformation, fake news. That's what we think.
right.
That's automatically, I think, what we think. We never think misinformation of the mind. And that is what this is. And it's a different way of looking at the same problem. And the result is pretty severe of all of this. It's not just a problem for you as in the individual. It's a huge problem for the country, for the organization. So even at an organizational level, you've got to think about, companies go bust because they don't listen in terms of innovation, or they're not sustainable. And it costs companies a huge amount of money. It costs companies around, I think it's 250 million for the average Fortune 500 company. I think it's a lot more than that. That was an estimate that, according to
Yeah.
Harvard Business Review, but I think it has to be more than that if you actually factor in everything. So this
Yeah.
is really costly. Companies are imploding. M&A is still failing. Medical diagnoses are wrong. People are still being wrongfully convicted, and yet we still think we're great decision makers. It's exactly that point. It just doesn't compute. So the other thing point that I tried to make in the book is that our responsibility is huge, and you don't have to be the CEO or the president. You just think in your own world what decisions you make. You hold power, and that power is really, really important. And when you hold power, you might be admired, you might not, but when you are admired, it does have a silencing effect on other people. And you have that responsibility to try and evoke whatever it is people are saying. And but the problem is, even when you have power, which is one of the perimeter straps, which I'm sure we'll get onto, is that power is that the more you win, the more successful you are, the more you fear losing, and the more you hate losing, and therefore the worse decisions you are at risk of making. And you only have to think of whether you're a Donald Trump fan or not. You only have to think that in that situation, he was threatened with loss of power, and look what happened. No, I don't think anyone's saying that was a good decision. So I don't think I'm going on either side of the fence by saying that. But
Yeah.
the Capitol Hill riots were not a good thing by anyone's standards. So, but what happens when you are threatened with that loss of power? When you're in a company and you think you're about to lose power, do you take the misconduct route? Some people do, and a lot of people do. When you want to preserve your position, what do you do? Now, a lot of people get it right, but a lot of people don't. And this is about knowing that in a situation where you're threatened with loss of power, or you're starting your career and you're desperate to get up that ladder and be the first, and I want to be the VP, and I want to be the manager, and I want to be this, that, and the other, which we have all done, and I am certainly guilty of that one. Is that really that's when we have to be most careful and not make these mistakes. So it's a very complicated area, and the mistake is just rushing to judgment and assuming that one simple little thing is the answer. It isn't. Understanding behavior is a massive advantage for people.
Yeah, yeah. Very well said, Nuala. I note the time. I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute. But before we wrap things up for today, I did want to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, where they can find your book to learn more, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Sure. And well, I'm available on LinkedIn, so please do feel free to hook in. I'm available. I should say my name is Nuala, Nuala, Walsh. And then my website is www.nualagwalsh.com. It's available on Amazon and all leading outlets. And I guess maybe a final thought to think about is really, again, I would emphasize most people get it right. As you say, there's an optimism lens here too. Most people get it right, but when you get it wrong, the consequences are enormous. This is an opportunity for people to stand out. It really is, rather than lose out. So all you have to do is just be that little bit more measured, that little bit more considerate in terms of what people are saying, and to think beyond it. Don't just accept things at face value. Take
Yeah.
things to the next level, second guess, question your own judgment, and at the end of the day, ask questions and question answers.
I love it. Well said. Very succinctly said. That was wonderful. Nuala, it has just been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Nuala can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a